Las Vegas, Nevada. This is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, real therapists. If you have any questions you'd like to ask or advice you'd like to give, come on over to podtherapy.net or just come up to this fancy microphone. We're recording with a live studio audience today, so we want to say thank you to all of our loyal listeners for showing up. We want to say welcome to those of you who may be hearing us for the first time. And we want to say, hey, we totally get it to the rest of you who are just showing up to get good seats for Penn Sunday School.
Totally fine.
And
welcome
now,
to the family.
Broadcasting from ScoopFest 2018.
Yeah!
That guy's Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangeman. It's time for some Pod Therapy.
Welcome to ScoopFest 2018. We are sitting before a very awesome live audience of beautiful people and dedicated Therapals. How many of you guys are Therapals in the audience today? Love you! We got any Therapods? Yes! And where's THERAPRODUCER Jake and Smitty? There they are. They run the show. Those are our bosses. Both of you, thank you for coming. We'll see you at the board meeting. Super excited to have you guys. Excited to be here, and thank you to our friends for inviting us.
Yes, thank you. We want to say thank you to Ice Cream Social. They have been great as kind of mentors, allowing us to come on here, and now being really good landlords to us.
That's right. We're at the Churn. Yeah! Super cool. Now Jacob's like getting all this therapy, and he's just like, okay, this is odd. Every day is odd now. It's working, though. He's making real breakthroughs. Really proud of Jacob.
Yes, great.
Wish he'd stop drinking during his sessions, though.
No. Well, then it's not Jacob.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not Jacob. So to start with, I have a quick announcement to make, something I'm very proud of. I've been a Scoop since early 2015.
Yeah.
And I have completed my first obelisk. So Jim has registered a Scoop name, which he will announce at the end of the show, because otherwise we don't want you all to leave after we announce it.
You have something to hang in there for.
Yeah.
So does that make me like your Padawan? How does this work?
I'll be honest, I have some really mixed feelings about it because I was really excited at first, and then it like hit me that I was like, now I have unleashed Jim onto the Scoops.
I'm with you.
And
I'm having a hell of a time at ScoopFest. It has been awesome. And I love that I had a better seat than you on day one.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's great. And now I feel like I'm wondering if this is what Oppenheimer felt like.
Yeah, I see where you're going with this.
Now I have become the destroyer of Scoop
worlds.
Group.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Scoops. It was a good run while it lasted, and Jim showed up and ruined the party.
All right. So, we are going to, the format for the show, we are going to have a microphone available. So if anybody has any questions or anything. But first, we should probably do an introduction.
Yeah, so just if you want to get your wheels turning and start thinking of something you might ask or a story you might tell, I'm going to introduce what we are as a show. Because while there's a lot of folks in the front who had sushi with us and totally feel like they know us almost too well, there's a lot of folks that are here for Penn Sunday School in an hour, and so they're like, what the hell is going on? Let me explain what the hell's going on. We basically live here in Las Vegas, Nevada. We are actually licensed therapists in different disciplines. And about a year ago, we started talking about what does it mean to have a conversation out loud that destigmatizes mental health, that kind of takes that sting and that what's going on kind of thing away from it, and changes the conversation to sort of, this is positive, this is encouraging, it's dare say humorous at times, we can laugh at this, and we can also be real. Talk about real people's real problems and try to help them out. And so the genesis of the show was, let's put therapists on this thing, let's talk to real humans, and let's see if a natural conversation happens. And it's really just been a lot of fun. We actually launched this show January of this year, and in the last, 10 months now? It has been awesome. It has been a hell of a ride, and of course, Ice Cream Social, extremely supportive. The reason we got involved with these guys was, obviously he's a Scoop. We wrote in a Jock versus Nerd. How many of you guys heard that? It was in sepsis. Yeah, the episode was in sepsis. Up to that point, I had never heard Ice Cream Social, and he had been trying to obelisk me for a long time. I was like, I'll get to it. So then he's like, hey, we're going to send in this thing, Jock versus Nerd. It's like, okay, this is fun. We're doing sports questions. This will be a lot of fun. So then it goes in. I listened to the episode where they do it, and it was hilarious watching them like play with mental health stuff. Then they invited us on the show. So then we get to be on In Sepsis. I cried laughing. I couldn't breathe. And so they would like be in the middle of doing their thing and then pivot to me and go, so anyway, Jim, and I'm like, no, stop. Like, go to Nick. I don't know. And so it was so much fun. So I've been like a de facto Scoop ever since, and now I officially have my Scoop name, which we'll be unveiling at the end. But it's been such a ride. So we are actual therapists, and we do answer real people's real questions. Usually people write into the show. This is the first time we've ever gotten to do one live, where we're actually looking at the people who might ask questions. If you don't, people have written in, so we totally have real questions to run with. But if you want to, you can come up, and we're going to have that mic up there, and we will take your questions. For us, this is actually a big relief because we never get to ask a follow-up question. So, like, people will write in and say, hey, here's what I'm facing. And as therapists, we're so naturally used to talking to another human and saying, hey, real quick, what was this like? What about this? And, like, try to turn the problem around a little bit to get our hands on it. And so for us, this is a treat because this is like a giant group therapy session. So we'll look forward to your reviews on Yelp. All positive, 5 stars. Okay, don't screw up my career, please. But we should probably introduce ourselves a little bit since we have a whole lot of new folks that have maybe never heard the show before. So you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I'll introduce you, I guess.
Oh, okay, yeah, we'll introduce each other. That sounds fun.
Yeah. So this is Jim Jobin. He is a professional therapist and an unprofessional podcast host.
Yes.
Here
and
in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Yeah.
Jim specializes in mental health, marriage and family therapy. He's also an associate professor of behavioral health at ASU.
Sun Devils.
And
she gets it.
And is an award-winning, overconfident, know-it-all. ScoopFest, give it up for my co-host for Pod Therapy, Jim Jobin.
Hi.
Dr. Jim Jobin.
You're too kind. To my right, and I assume your left, this is the host of Pod Therapy. He is Nick Tangeman. Nick Tangeman is an addiction specialist. He has worked extensively with trauma because addictions and trauma usually go together. He is also a clinical supervisor of new therapists. A lot of people don't know this, but to become a therapist, you have to go through this whole grasshopper sensei process, just like in Kung Fu. And so he is that guy. He is basically David Carradine in every possible way that means something. I like that some of you get it. He has no clue what I'm talking about, but thanks for being there for me. Nick is also basically the Nevada sheriff of substance abuse. So not only is he a therapist, but he actually goes around and polices other organizations to make sure that they're awesome and that they're not violating the rules, which is how we became friends when he put me in jail for the first time. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Tangeman.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess let's go ahead and get this started off.
Yeah. Is there anybody that would like to come up and bring up a question? Oh, the hands go flying. Let's get Stacy from Alaska up here. Give her a hand. And I believe it's Frozen 49th Scoop, right?
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay.
Also, big hand for the leggings.
There she is. It's her fault.
That was her idea. Yep. I was go ahead and pull it off, and I was pulling up to the valet at the Excalibur, and I just see this wall of people with those pants, and I was not in on that memo, but I was like, those are the scoops.
So, caught the first one on. Awesome. And I never really thought I'd have something, but the Tournament of Kings really messed me up. I'm pyrophobic.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
And
That is a bad show for that.
Oh, yeah. The first one was really... I'm even shaking thinking about it. The first one was okay, but thankfully David and Rebecca were there and were kind of like talking me down. There was a couple of other people around me. But the second one, oh shit.
Yeah.
I was gone. How do you deal... Because I was telling people, oh, my brother used to flick lit matches at me and stuff. And then one of the times I just randomly said, and then there was the kitchen fire.
Oh.
And I was like, you never said there was a kitchen fire. Like, all the stories I've heard you say, you never said there was a kitchen fire.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me, maybe that was the actual catalyst, was that kitchen fire. So how do you say...
Get comfortable. Tell me about your dreams.
I
Start at the weirdest one. Go.
I'm hypomanic, so I actually have chronic nightmares.
Okay.
And most of my nightmares now revolve around methamphetamines. I'm 12 years clean.
Hey! Recovery.
That is awesome.
Congratulations.
So you definitely,
Yeah.
good guy. 'Cause,
Addictions.
Thank you.
dealing with people, going through it, I white-knuckled it.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you deal with something that, is a startling, oh my God, this is my fear, holy crap. Because thankfully everybody was super nice. I was like, I'm close enough than I did. And how do you suggest working through that? So, because like I said, David was putting himself in between it.
Right.
But how do you get, because I've worked up to about a campfire. How do you suggest people with that kind of immediate reaction to fear slowly grow up to it?
So we call these specific phobias. A lot of you guys have probably heard phobic, right? To be afraid of something. Arachnophobia, I think, was like a movie at one point. I don't know. So there are lots of specific phobias. Pyrophobia is one. So we're going to dive into the treatment of that, but can I ask a couple of questions? So you mentioned something about a kitchen fire. Can you tell me what happened with that?
So I remember, my dad's an alcoholic, my mom was a stoner, and it was probably early 80s because they put me on the counter by the microwave, and I grew up in that house. So once I got older, it's about a size like this big. So I must have been 3 or 4, and my parents stepped out for a second because my brother's 7 years older than me, so he was probably doing something.
Right.
The kitchen was offset, so you had to go through the dining room and then to the kitchen. So you had to go out, so you couldn't see the living room.
So was it an experience that would make a person feel trapped?
Well, I was like a toddler on this countertop, and the stove caught on fire.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know how long it took for them to get back to it. And like I said, I was telling the story a whole bunch of times, and then that one random moment, oh yeah, there was a kitchen fire.
Right.
And that's where it's like, holy shit, maybe that's where it came
And that's
from.
powerful because that's a very young age to have such a good memory. It's unusual that somebody would be able to tell the tale specifically. I mean, you outlined the blueprint of the house. And at 3 years old, I don't remember where I was, who I was. Allegedly, my dad took me to Disneyland. I still call bullshit, Dad. Show me the ears. But no, that's very vivid to you. Okay, so that's your first real memory of encountering fire in a way that was really scary.
Yeah.
Now, the show had pyrotechnics, right? And it was out in the middle of the stage. It was a big room.
I was in the first row, though.
Okay.
I was on the dragon side.
Oh. Well, hey, this was fun. And Russia.
Dragons.
This is a safe place.
I told you not to get into this.
I didn't mean to. She brought it up. The first question was about this. I'm sorry that they made us all feel unsafe. The dragons are welcome here, too. We're non-judgmental on Pod Therapy.
So as far as what to do to move forward, one of the things I think, first off, is that it sounds like you've already...
I sent them the orca.
Oh.
Sorry.
I mean, it sounds like you've already taken a few steps towards doing that. I mean, you have people around you. What is it specifically that they did that helped you out in that situation?
They all really noticed I stopped eating immediately. Like, I couldn't. I was shaking. I was a little crying. Just standing there kind of... I didn't even realize that I was reacting in such a dramatic way, but they really did. And then... then the next bit, and David just kind of put himself, and David's the shortest male, Scoop, next to Matt, and so
let's give it up for David, who's a hero.
And then of course, we have Matt, who's the shortest Scoop of all, and I love him to death, but yeah, he just kind of realized something was wrong, so he would just kind of scoot forward, and I would just sit behind him.
Can you tell me a little bit more about what you experience when fire's happening? Like, what is it like if I'm watching you in a documentary? What do I see? What's happening?
Well, I know I was crying and shaking.
Yeah.
There was that paralyzing fear. And then when the heat, it was specifically the heat, when that was, I would just cringe.
Yep.
So you would just see, like, calm and calm and then cringe. And then just... Even, like I said, just thinking about makes me
see, okay. So earlier I said that there's what's called specific phobias, right? This sounds a lot more to me like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So what happens with PTSD, if you're ever... I know everybody's heard it by this point. You've seen it on the news. You've heard about soldiers coming home with it. If you're really unfamiliar with it, think Batman, basically, that you witness something terrifying, and then anytime you're near that, you have what's called an abreaction, which is like you go into a non-normal state. For him, he beats up the bad people, he re-traumatizes himself and reenacts his trauma. That's okay. I wrote a paper on it. It was fascinating. Diagnosed most of Marvel and DC comics.
Meanwhile, real scientists are
doing
problems.
real work, and here's Jim like, when are you going to acknowledge my work? So This sounds a lot like PTSD. So in post-traumatic stress disorder, we go through something that is beyond our ability to language. It is bigger than us. And so there's a misconception out there about how trauma works. A lot of people think that trauma has to be gunshots or a bomb going off. It has to be really headline news scary. That's not true. With trauma, it is beyond your cognitive ability to language, to understand, and to process. 3-year-old put in a situation that is scary, a real terrifying phenomenon, fire happening, the heat happening, being in the presence of it, and incapable of doing anything about it, incapable of really forming language at all. Now there's a haunting effect that whenever you're near that phenomenon in any way, or the thought of that phenomenon, we start to have those classic PTSD symptoms. Things like anxiety, things like paralysis, anhedonia, loss of pleasure, losing the moment, losing yourself, cold sweats. All of these are classic symptoms of what might be PTSD. So to start with, now this is actually a good point for us to note. For the State of Nevada Board of Examiners, who are, I'm sure, listening, hi Jake, we are not practicing therapy at this moment. This is an educational experience. We are only hearing out thoughts and providing psychoeducation. That is a caveat. Don't take my licenses away, please. But yeah, so I'm not diagnosing you, but I'm saying this sounds more like what I would read with PTSD. Now, there's still a phobia. There's still a fire phobia that's still there, and you're uncomfortable in that situation. But we could talk a little bit about treatment options and what we typically do with somebody who's been traumatized.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I would encourage not only you, but everybody to do, because not enough people do this, is actually get into therapy. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast, was to remove some of that stigma, because so many people benefit from it, yet so many people are so afraid to even try it. One thing that I've worked with some folks with PTSD, especially from the addictions end, and one of the things that I try to help them deal with, some techniques. Being able to, if we look at your anxiety on a scale from like 0 to 10. Now, I'm going to backtrack a little bit, because one thing that makes this situation a little bit different is that it wasn't a situation in which you were intentionally exposing yourself to a trigger.
No.
Right? You didn't know that this was really going to happen when you bought the ticket.
Right.
Well, they said pyrotechnics, but I knew that there were fireworks, and that's fine, because I know that they're on a set path, and they're not really hot, and they're completely controlled.
And also, Dragon turned out to be the worst possible place, because the dude with the fire sword, lives there.
Right. Yeah, he was right in front. And the heat.
He is not moving.
The heat from that was intense. And there was a couple times that I was just startled.
Oh my God,
I had no
felt
idea
the heat.
It was going to happen.
That was terrifying.
So one of the things for people who are going to be constantly running into the thing that causes them stress, there's this technique that you can do where if you look at your anxiety on a scale from 0 to 10, okay, and 10 being the highest level, 0 being no anxiety at all, identify first what is your... I got it. I've done this
I just want to make sure people can hear you.
Fine, Jim. So identify first what is the level of anxiety that is something you can handle. It's not going to be comfortable, but the highest level that you feel like, okay, if I'm at a 5, I can be uncomfortable, but I'm going to be okay.
Right.
All right. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to identify specific techniques. Grounding techniques are always a good one.
Yes.
So a couple different things that I've worked with people on is a grounding technique can be anything that takes you out of the moment, that just kind of brings you back down into reality. Because when you re-experience trauma or you're experiencing that anxiety, it's almost kind of like your brain just kind of leaves and it kind of starts to drift off a little bit. Yeah. Grounding technique is meant to kind of snap you back. So different things, like I've had some clients that will use smells, because that's just something they can relate to. So if they've got like a perfume or something that they can smell. I've had other people who will take like a rock and put it in their non-dominant hand and kind of twirl it around, feel all the little bumps, and really kind of tune into that rock. Anything that's going to kind of start to bring you back down. Yeah. So then the next thing that you do is you start to practice that. And the first thing that you have to do is you have to be able to identify on a regular basis what is your current anxiety scale.
Yes.
So on a scale from 0 to 10, where would you say you are right now?
Thinking about it, about a 3.
Okay. All right. And that's
excellent.
Okay.
Good
that's
self-awareness, too.
So,
that's awesome.
So now what we want to do is we want to start practicing some sort of technique that can bring you back down to maybe a 2.
Yes.
Or maybe a 1. All right? Allow yourself to get comfortable again, and then start thinking about it again.
Yes.
Okay? And then allow yourself to get up to a 3, and then use that coping technique, bring it back down. And then you can continue to do this. And then what ultimately happens, or what tends to happen for most of the folks that I've worked with, is that they start to then take control over this thing.
Yes.
Right? Instead of this thing controlling you, now you are taking a more active approach in dealing with it.
Yeah, one of the things Nick just said, too, that I want to come alongside and highlight and zoom into, he said, allow yourself to get to a 3. So there's a form of therapy that we might do with something like a phobia called in vivo therapy. My psychology student knows what I'm talking about. And she's not my student at ASU. Don't fire me. Yet. In vivo therapy is whenever we sort of simulate the very thing that's actually scaring us. So let's say it's arachnophobia. I won't do this in my office because I am not messing with spiders, but like we might pull up a video online, right? Or I might have somebody as homework go to an actual store where they might have a tarantula and just be in the presence of that. And I want them to just notice themselves. And then that's where they're going to practice a technique like 5 sense grounding, what Nick's talking about, where I check in with my 5 senses. What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I see? Where am I? And another thing is obviously self-talk, that ability to actually ask yourself, hey, what's going on right now? I'm experiencing this show. Am I in danger? No. Is this a feeling or a fact? And there's actually lists of questions that when you go see a therapist, if they do cognitive behavioral therapy, they will walk you through and teach you to kind of do for yourself. Now, of course, the most important thing if you actually sense that kind of reality is what David did. Remove yourself from the situation. And that's something that I want everybody to know. A lot of people come into the office and they'll ask us about anxiety, phobias. I've had a lot of people work with phobias. And I want them to know you have permission to be afraid of this for the rest of your life. I have phobias. I cannot do anything medical, which is very ironic. Like, why is this happening? So, like, I cannot do ERs. I'll go see patients in ERs. That's pretty common. I guess I'm, like, mission-focused when I'm there. But, like, there's things that really scare me. And so if my wife's watching, like, Grey's Anatomy or something like that, I'm not even going to try. And she's like, really? You feel uncomfortable? I'm like, yes, I do, and there's no shame, okay? Do not stigmatize me. I'm going to go play a video game. And so, like, that's what I'll do. So you also give yourself permission to remove yourself from it and wait to come back until that part of the show's done. But I think that's important, too. Grounding technique's important. In vivo is something we can do with supervision. And then also giving yourself permission to pull back, I think, is really important, too.
And I would say, too, if you do decide to go into therapy, then that's where you're a therapist. I mean, we're just giving you information, some
all
stuff
education.
to start with. Yeah, but I would encourage you, if you have a therapist or if you're going to get into therapy, your therapist can kind of work with you on that and give you some homework on a daily basis.
Yeah. And huge congratulations on your recovery.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Give her a hand. Thank you. Thank you, Stacy.
And for the medical board, no money has exchanged hands, so they are not my therapist.
No informed consent was signed, Jake. Get off me. He's the president of my board. And he was on the show. So I feel like he's if I'm going down, he's going down with me at this point.
Yeah, he knew.
So feel free to walk right up to the stage. I saw a bunch of hands pop up.
Or you want to form a line, too, you can do that.
Yeah, go for it.
Then
that actually gives us a
better
better idea of like how to budget time, too.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. What's your name?
Manfred.
Hey, nice to meet you.
All right. So I love what you guys are doing about trying to destigmatize mental health, because
Yes.
if it was physical pain that people were having, you would say, I'm pretty sure your arm is broken, you should go see a doctor.
Yeah.
And someone would say, no,
I'm fine.
I don't want
Doctors are
anyone
weakness.
Yeah,
I'm going to
yeah.
do push-ups in the garage.
Yeah, so I don't want my boss to know that I'm, have an injured arm.
Right.
Stuff like that. But if someone says, I've been having these thoughts, having depression, yada, yada, like, oh, well, you should get help. And what do you think I should do? And it's like,
Right.
reruns of Frasier?
Right.
So-
Frasier,
so-
who definitely had no part in the conception of this show.
So my question is, the same way that like we have first aid and medical responders and family doctors and neurosurgeon, and there's different tiers of physical health.
Right.
What's a breakdown of some of the different tiers of mental health? Because you guys have mentioned things like life coaches who don't necessarily need any type of
Right.
certification, and then you guys bring up your certification boards and PhDs, different degrees that you can have and specializations. What's
Yeah.
just in general? How is the medical health situation structured?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, mental health. Yeah.
Mental health, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And actually, this is something that's continuing to evolve. So part of my job working for the program that I work for.
Pod therapy?
Right. No, my real job.
Oh.
Assertive community teams are a new thing that's starting to come up where we're actually looking at communities forming multidisciplinary teams to help individuals in their own home. So instead of a person having to go to their doctor for medical management and then having to go to get help for employment and then having to go to a substance abuse counselor, then a mental health therapist, you've got one team full of people who will travel and will actually come to the person. So that's kind of a new thing that's happening in Nevada. And I'm guessing if we're starting to do it in Nevada, it's been around every place else for like 15 years. Because we're way behind the rest of the country.
Yeah, in everything. Yeah.
Right. And there's actually mobile crisis units are something that's starting to pop up now, too. So mental health is now starting to become a more present force in law enforcement, EMTs, with firefighters. They're now actually considered part of that team. So that's kind of that first line of defense. And that really is kind of crisis management at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
And there are different disciplines, too, and different levels, too. Because, you mentioned like things like neurology and things like that. So here's a quick like primer breakdown, and we do this at the universities a lot too, and we explain like here's all the different jobs you can have. So okay, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. Okay, they went to regular old medical school, and then when they were done with medical school, they did a residency in psychiatry. So they followed around somebody who's a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist isn't going to listen to your problems unless like they have all the time in the world, which never happens. They treat you the way a regular family doctor does. You walk in, you get like 20 minutes of their time. You say I have anxiety, they're like, pills! And so they will get you pills, and they can write you a script. There's value to that. A lot any
psychiatrists in here.
Anybody's like, okay, we're safe. Right. So, yeah. So he said that one hand goes up. Hi, Dr. OKK. Anyway, so who is a real doctor and a really nice guy. Okay, so that's a psychiatrist, right? A psychologist who has a PhD in clinical psychology, they do psychotherapy, as does a licensed clinical social worker or a marriage and family therapist or a licensed professional counselor. Those people do talk therapy. They're the ones who you sit with for an hour and you do the talking through of what it is you're experiencing, and they're the ones who do like active psychology with you from a variety of different perspectives. There's also substance abuse counselors. So a lot of people get confused, and this is something we've seen in a lot of the folks that have written into the show, is they'll say, I'm looking for a therapist. Which one do I get? Do I go see an MFT, or do I go see a CPC, or an LCSW? And why are the acronyms there? AT&T, KFC. And so, like, we have to help people kind of digest that. That's a really good question. There are therapists at the bachelor level. Here in Nevada, we have certified alcohol and drug counselors. Is that? And these are the folks that are substance abuse counselors at the bachelor's level. Most therapists have master's degrees. Some will go up to doctorate. If you're seeing a therapist who has a master's degree and a clinical license in your state, you're in good hands. And they should have 5 stars on Yelp. I think that's important too. But that maybe destigmatizes. Does that kind of answer your question as far as like the mythology of what levels there are?
I'm just interested if someone feels like, they're having some intrusive thoughts, but it's not to the point where they're thinking about, taking action or anything.
Right.
Like what's some of like the first aid, Band-Aid, like local pharmacist information.
Well, yeah.
Like the lower tier of mental
therapy.
health. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess
lowest basement level.
The basic
Get a
level
podcast.
is sitting down with a friend and being able to talk honestly about that, and that's wonderful for mental
But this
health.
goes to a greater point. This is why everybody needs to learn mental health first aid. If right now I keeled over, like half of you have a card in your wallet that says you know how to save my life with CPR. I think that mental health first aid needs to be something everybody's trained in, because if your coworker comes to you and they're having problems, you should be able to kind of not necessarily kick them up to a therapist, but like triage it and like do something, have some kind of response skills. But unfortunately, we don't live in a country that takes that seriously.
So I guess what I'm kind of hearing you say then is something between just going out and grabbing a beer with my friend versus going to a therapist.
Yeah, is there something
that kind of middle
that exists below the bachelor's degree level?
Yeah, I mean, there's life coaches. I mean, and that's
I'm uncomfortable saying
try that.
Yeah,
but
life coaching is a phrase, and I believe in life coaching. I know a lot of life coaches, and I like the ones who respect the boundary. And they know they're non-medical. They have nothing to do with mental health. Their job is to provide wisdom and guidance as you try to have success in your life. But the question is there something at a subclinical level? Yes, every state's different. Like here, Nick, we have PSR, BST, so psychosocial rehabilitation and behavior skills trainers. And so those guys would be bachelor level or under bachelor level. And under the guidance of a therapist, they can work with you and try to troubleshoot some of those life problems and do things like, but you used a great word, intrusive thoughts, which tells me that you're one of those who actually read psychology. So intrusive thoughts is whenever you keep getting that idea in your head, a sticky thought. It's uncomfortable. It's troubling. And it just pops into your mind. You're like, why can't every time you're taking a shower, how many of you guys have had that memory of whenever you were in 5th grade that you did something embarrassing? Okay. Nick has a great theory on that about how to get over that, by the way. Remember that because you helped me with that. Because you were like, how many times have you thought about other people's most embarrassing moment?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Never.
Never.
So nobody's thinking about yours.
But I do think, though, that I guess kind of getting back to this question is I don't think that there's any problem too small for a therapist.
Yes.
That would be my advice to you is I would say just go visit a therapist and try it out. There's a lot of times where, there's at one point I was seeing a therapist and the issue that I went in there to see a therapist for turns out wasn't really the issue that was bothering me at all. And
Right.
it wasn't really until I got in there, because I think this is something that all therapists should do is actually, if you're not taking care of yourself seeing a therapist, then you probably shouldn't be seeing other people. But I think that's one of the things that surprises people is that you feel like, this is not significant. It's not that big of a deal.
Good point.
But really, once you get in there and you start
Yep.
talking, then your self-awareness improves. And then it
That is
starts
really
bringing
well
up
said.
all these other things. And the world starts to make sense in a way that it didn't before.
Okay,
Yeah.
so just to labor the metaphor until it's chapped and bleeding.
Please.
So
This
like
is hot.
going into the doctor for something small might reveal another issue
Yeah.
that you could need help with.
Nobody
Yeah, or-
hesitates to
yeah.
go to their family doctor when they just want antibiotics. In the same way, you should have a therapist in your life that you've met once. I've had that happen. I've had folks come in to see me, and I'm like, what brings us here today? And they're like, nothing, everything's good, but I need you on standby. So you exist, and now we've met in case we ever have to come back and do something. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then one day, a year later, they're like, hey, it's me. And I'm like, welcome back. Let's get into it. So I think that there's no problem too small. Nick said it really right. A lot of people, that stops them from therapy because they're like, well, I don't want to hurt myself, so maybe I'm not supposed to go through this. No, therapy's for everybody, no matter what you're going through. You can literally be going through, am I happy at my job? Good enough. Come on in. Let's start working on it. Okay?
Yep.
Good
All
question.
right.
Thank you
No,
for that.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much for telling us all about the system and being
Thank
here
you.
at ScoopFest.
Cool. Our next guest is definitely not my student from ASU
No, but I am an ASU student.
and has nothing to do with me.
So I guess this came up with Stacy's question, and it kind of came up a little bit in the last one. But I know that, myself, I have been diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder.
Yep.
So I get anxious about everything all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, me too.
It's great. But I know that a lot of listeners, a lot of scoops, we all suffer from anxiety in different levels, whether or not it's been clinically diagnosed. But even as a student, I don't quite really know how to do this. So I've had to sit and explain to people before. My logical brain says this is not something to worry about. Mm-hmm. Emotional brain says, oh, we're going to worry.
We're worried,
And
yeah.
we are going to panic, and we are going to start crying.
Yeah.
And you are not going to stop crying for
Right.
the next 6 hours.
I was doing that
Have fun.
right up there about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, I know a few techniques, like the therapist I've been seeing for a while. Because one of the things, because I have been in some very serious accidents, I've almost died twice.
Oh, wow.
Before the age of 18.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm terrified of dying, even though I know it happens to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things she would do is say, okay, well, you're not dead now. CBT, let's focus on the
Be in the now.
texture of
Right.
your pants. How does that feel between your fingers? But sometimes it doesn't work. So for those of us that may not work, how would you suggest people with anxiety that know, okay, logically, I know I'm okay. This is not something to be upset about.
Right.
How do you do that?
That's a great question. So I live with generalized anxiety disorder. And when Nick and I worked together at rehab, I don't know if you've ever known this, but addicts can be intense, and especially when they're in the beginning of rehab.
My mother is diagnosed manic bipolar,
Okay.
and she's a meth addict.
There it is. So you've
yeah.
seen some stuff.
I've seen some stuff.
I've seen those people when they stop getting their meth, and it's awesome. So I've had intense experiences, right, even at work, and there's been times when I've walked into Nick's office and said, hey, I'm your next patient. And he's like, what? So we've had to work on it. The best work that I've done personally for my generalized anxiety disorder, first off, medication's okay. There's a lot of people that have a really big fear about medication. And I don't want you to have that, especially when we're talking about anxiety and depression. SSRIs are so mild, and it's okay to do that. I don't think that's the solution. I think it can be part of the solution, the toolkit. But for me, the most important thing I ever did was cognitive behavioral therapy and learning how to identify what is triggering me, what is my automatic thought, what is happening to me, what am I really afraid of, what's the meaning of this? Because it's usually not the thing. It's usually not I'm out of milk. It's usually the meaning, right, or the emotion of it. And Nick does a whole workshop on this, which one day we're going to get on tape, because it really helps me. Like, I'll go to him. He's like, Jim, what's the meaning of this? And I'm like, this. And he's like, okay, let's do some self-talk, right? What's the worst thing that can happen? Can you technically live through that? Is there another way to look at this problem? If you had a friend right now, what would you suggest to them? What would you talk them through? And then can we put the thought on trial? Is there evidence for this thought? And whenever I do that self-talk and I walk myself through those questions, my anxiety ticks down a little bit. And I keep doing that until I'm in a safer place. And the more I do that, I find that my brain rewires itself, which is a phenomenon called neuroplasticity, where it actually becomes less and less vulnerable to anxiety over time. So CBT, I know for me, speaking just in my personal experience as a patient, has been extremely powerful, and it's usually what I pass on to my clients as well.
Right. Are you familiar with the CBT triangle? Anybody? Okay, so basically, I'll just go through this
Not
just
to
really
be confused
quick.
with Brett Kavanaugh's triangle. Too soon?
So the CBT triangle, think of it obviously as a triangle, where you've got your thoughts, you've got your emotions, and then you've got your behaviors. And between each of these is arrows going both ways. So the idea behind this is that by influencing one of those, you automatically influence the other two. So if we were to take like depression as an example, so if I'm feeling depressed, if I'm suffering from depression, my thoughts may be things like I'm worthless, life's miserable. My emotions are going to be just sadness, depression, obviously. My behaviors might be I'm going to stay in bed all day.
Right.
So the idea is that we don't have to change all three of those. We pick one, we make some change, and then we see how that affects the other two. So maybe for me, I always start with my behavior because for me, that's just the easiest thing for me to attack. So I may feel depressed. I may have depressing thoughts, but I'm going to force myself to go outside and go for a hike.
Yeah.
And then by doing that, my thoughts change, and then my emotions change.
Yeah, and I like, for me personally, I've done stuff like that. I know for me, a lot of it, and I'm doing it a little bit right now.
Good job.
My physical response is to immediately start crying. Like, it'll be, hey, I need to tell my boss about the potluck next week, and just the fact that I have to go talk to them, tears. And that's something that I've dealt with since I was a kid, dealt with parents going like, I remember being in like the first grade and them being like, you're 7 years old, stop crying. And so like, how would someone deal with something like that?
Okay.
Like,
right. So that's something I want to point out because what you just said there was really important because what you've attached to this now is you've attached a meaning to it.
Yes.
Okay, so you automatically have a negative connotation to crying. So when I'm crying, this means something bad.
Means I'm not a grown-up.
I'm an adult. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't have all this. So you're basically, when you're doing that, you are creating this situation. It's kind of a no-win situation for yourself, right? I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to attack that thought because that thought is, let's take that to court. Is it okay for an adult to cry?
Yes.
Absolutely. We all do it. It's a natural emotion. It's a natural response. So that would be my suggestion. So if you're currently working with a therapist bring that up and ask, start talking about that. Start talking about this meaning that you've attributed to your emotions. Because I really feel like once you've attacked that, then you kind of start to allow yourself to feel emotion, and then now you start taking control of that. Instead of the emotion controlling you, you start taking control of that emotion.
Yeah, and that's something I want everybody to be doing. Anxiety is the most common thing that humans experience, and the other half of anxiety is usually depression. It's very rare that, in my experience, that I see it siloed as only one thing. They're usually two sides of the same coin. And so this process of self-examination, putting thoughts on trial, wondering what's a feeling, what's a fact, being curious, self-talk, this is all part of a package of things that we might do in therapy. And asking myself, what's the meaning of this to me? What does this mean? Like that concept of crying. I sure as hell hope it's okay for grown-ups to cry. I have a 3-year-old. I cry during Mulan, okay? At the end, whenever, she gives the sword to her dad, I was like, baby, it's okay. Daddy didn't care. So, yeah, I'm getting yeah. I love my daughter. That's the point. So, but that's something that's so huge. And I just want to thank you as well, because as somebody, one of the things we keep bringing up, the drum you're always going to hear us bang on Pod Therapy, is we want to be approachable. We want it to feel like, okay, I've heard 2 therapists now. I think I have a good feeling for what it's like to sit down with one. We're very natural people, but also we've been to therapy, both of us. It is required in the state of Nevada that every aspiring therapist go through 2 or 3 years of supervision, which is therapy. Okay, and they're required to do that one-on-one. So Nick is a therapist to other therapists for them to become a therapist. And so that's actually a requirement. So therapy is something, again, there's no thing that's too low that you shouldn't approach this, and there's always some good self-work to do. Even if it's not causing that clinically significant amount of distress, it's not ruining my life, if it's something that's a challenge to me, it's okay to address it. And I know that you're aspiring to be a therapist one day. At least I'm trying to nudge you in that direction.
No, I definitely leaning towards.
And this is something you're going to get to work on.
Yeah.
It's going to be awesome. And so as you pursue that profession, you're actually going to be put into therapy so that you can challenge yourself in these ways and grow. It's going to be awesome. Yeah. Thank you for your question.
Yeah,
thank you so much. Give her a hand.
Thank you. Okay.
Come on up. I love that people actually are asking questions. I was so scared that I was going to have to make everything up again. All the questions are made up by Jim.
Well, Fred, thank you for letting me come up. I've got a question about a particular therapeutic tool that I had heard about a few years ago that by this point may be bunk. I don't know.
What's your name?
Leon.
Hi, Leon.
Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
EMDR.
And its efficacy in addiction treatment.
Yeah.
I was curious if is it used or how does it work? I mean, it sounds crazy to me that it's a tool.
Let me do this. I'll explain what that is, and then because trauma and addiction, we can kind of take it from there.
Yep.
So he's asking about this. He's saying, hey, I've heard of a specific technique called EMDR, and that stands for eye movement desensitization. I believe it's retraining might be the last one. The R? I don't know. Anyway, so here's the idea. Yeah, reprocessing. So if you want to do EMDR, here's essentially what I'm going to have you do. If you come to me, EMDR is good for trauma, okay? And I've done this. I don't mind this technique. It has its value. I have patients that are listening to this podcast like, yeah, you made me do that last week, Jim, so it better damn well be good. Okay, so here's the deal. So basically, we have 2 hemispheres of our brain, right? And so there's this ability when we're trying to help somebody process trauma, because trauma has this automatic response. It's like my instincts are in overdrive, and I want to protect myself from things that are actually not endangering me. Remember the question about fire earlier. What we might have a person do is have them teach us about the trauma history in their life. So if you're Bruce Wayne, I'm going to have you tell me the story of what it was like that fateful night whenever you lost your family, and you're going to tell me that story of that trauma in our session. While you're doing that, I am going to stimulate both hemispheres of your brain strategically while you're telling the story. And that's the fundamental theory of EMDR, is that by stimulating each hemisphere of the brain bilaterally while they're telling the story, it metabolizes the energy of the story so that their brain is starting to process and file the data differently. And by doing that, it can take away some of the sensation of pain and fear that may be associated with the trauma. So how do we stimulate somebody bilaterally? Usually, it is with eye movement desensitization. How does that work? Everybody watch the bottle. I'm going to bill you for this. So if you're in a session with me, I may be holding something, I may be holding up a finger, and while you're talking, I'm going to move that across your visual plane so that your eyes have to follow me. And if that's happening, every time your eye crosses that center point threshold, a different hemisphere of your brain takes control. Another thing we'll do is we'll put little paddles in your hands that kind of shake, and you might be talking while you're doing those, and those things will move. I usually give my patients plastic spoons because I don't have the arm strength to do this. And so, like, they'll hold up plastic spoons one at a time while they're talking, and basically we're doing that process to help them better file that system of thought and help them decrease the pain of the trauma. But his question is, does this have power in addiction? It was invented for trauma, so what its application to addiction is actually very meaningful because of how often those two go together.
Right, and I guess that was what I was going to say. Is I mean, hearing Jim describe it, it sounds like witchcraft, but it actually.
It is. It is.
But as
there's
far
a code
as
for it, I can bill.
As far as the research has been overwhelmingly supportive in its effectiveness.
Yes.
I don't really know of anybody doing it specifically for addiction. I know people using it for trauma.
Yes.
And they usually, so I guess the folks that I know that have addiction, they're not going and using it for addiction. They're doing it for trauma. Because trauma is so closely tied to addiction.
Yes.
I really don't know of anybody, at least that I've known of,
Not
that has
for
used it
addiction.
Strictly for addiction with no history of trauma.
And it wouldn't be indicated. You actually wouldn't use it for addiction. So,
Right.
But trauma and addiction go together so frequently. Sometimes people are traumatized before they discover a drug or alcohol, and that's part of the process of, like, this delinks me from my reality and it gives me a measure of freedom, right? But also, drugs and alcohol are themselves traumatic. You are ingesting a poison that is putting you outside of conscious control of your actions and your life, and frequently that turns into violence, pain, sadness, loss of things. It's traumatic in and of itself. And remember what trauma is. Any experience that's beyond my brain's ability to language at the time. So if you're dropping ecstasy and then something spooky happens in front of you, it didn't need to be that spooky. Your brain did not have the ability to language that. Like, you could, be dropping acid, and I could be like, there's no Santa Claus. And you're like, bah! Why did the giant green monster say that? So it doesn't have to be that way. So trauma and addiction go hand in hand a lot. That's not something Nick and I will do to treat a substance abuse disorder, but it is something that we'll do concurrently in the treatment of a substance abuse disorder.
Yeah, that was really my question.
Yeah.
Do you notice a big difference, or maybe make it easier to treat
It is effective.
an addiction if that therapy has been done? at that
Yeah.
point?
Yeah, it seems to be very effective.
Yeah,
actually.
trauma must be addressed, or any addiction treatment that, and that's why Nick and I work together at a rehab. I have a mental health background, he's an addictions background, and we would partner up, right? Because he's addressing the addiction side, I'm addressing the mental health side, and that was the whole team effort that we really had to do. And also there was like a masseuse and chiropractor and all the other fun bells and whistles that happen at a luxury rehab, which we no longer work at, so I don't care if you go. But also get healthy. You should definitely do that. Thanks for your question.
Thank
Give
you
him a
very
hand.
much.
Thanks, Leon. So we got time for probably one more question. Those of you that are still in line, if you want to, maybe two. So hang there just in case, but we are getting toward the end of it.
Hello.
Hello, sir. What's your name?
Will.
Hi, Will.
I'm a power technician.
Hey,
Yeah, no.
you did this.
No, I'm sorry.
You're the bane of everybody's fears.
So actually, I just hate talking to doctors.
Okay.
So hi.
You can
Hi.
talk to me.
Yeah,
You're doing
okay.
great.
All right,
I don't have a PhD.
No, but it's not even just doctors. So like anything formal,
Right.
anything where there's a procedure, like checking into a hotel,
Right.
asking about like a driver's license
Yes.
renewal.
Yes.
That
Going to the
stuff
DMV. Yeah.
terrifies me.
Terrifying. Yeah.
And talking on the phone because I don't know who's calling me.
Yeah.
If it's going to be a formal conversation or not.
Right.
So like I can talk to strangers just fine. I can be on stage just fine.
Right.
But the idea of that I will shut down.
Yeah.
And I don't do it.
Anticipation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're anticipating what's going to happen. But if we were just walking down the street and you saw me coming, you can't anticipate what the conversation's going to be, so you flow naturally into it, right?
Yes.
But when you overthink it,
Yeah.
yeah. This applies everywhere. Okay, so you might be thinking, I don't have that problem. Okay, I promise you do. You have this problem somewhere in your life where you overthink something, right? We call that fortune telling. That is a cognitive distortion, a mental mirage. And if we believe it, we will psych ourselves out. We'll psych ourselves out for job interviews. We'll psych ourselves out for ScoopFest 2018. It's okay, Nick talked me down. I'm doing really good. But that's something I think we all relate to, right? And that's a cognitive distortion where we're anticipating something and we predict what we think is going to happen. And in addiction recovery, Nick, we call that future tripping, right?
Right.
And that gets in the way of a lot of people.
How does this impact your functioning day to day?
Well, I didn't get my driver's license until I was 22.
Yes.
And it wasn't because I've driven since I was 16 or 15. But I was
So you're admitting to crimes.
Yeah.
Again, this is not therapy. These are not confidential.
Okay.
The police will be waiting for you when you get off the plane.
So anyway, multiple states.
Just piling it up.
Yeah. Well, so that was. So that was a big thing. And then another thing is like just daily, like phone calls. Like I don't answer the phone. I screen everything.
Yeah.
Unless I know that someone's going to call me.
Yes.
You know, if I know ahead of time, and
well, your real friends text you.
Well, yeah.
Nobody calls.
No one calls anymore.
Nobody calls.
So that's the thing. I don't call anyone either. So,
right.
And the calling is a whole different subject, I guess. I do have a stutter. Thankfully, it's under control right now.
Well done.
Thank you. So I don't even like to call people, formal or informal, because I think that I'm going to maybe mess up, and that whole thing is just, yeah.
That's a big thing with anxiety that I've
Yes.
noticed is that
That's
the
anxiety.
biggest part of anxiety is having anxiety about anxiety.
Anxiety.
Right.
Yep.
So what kind of techniques have you, because obviously you made it to ScoopFest.
Well,
you
see,
were
but this-
able to check into a hotel.
well,
How have you been able to do all this?
Because I know that I have to have a place to sleep. I mean, so usually what I'll do is I'll pace and pace and pace, and I will observe for 30, 40 minutes how the process works. Like turnout back in the summer in New Jersey, I was in Newark Airport for the first time, and there was a food court that it was like self-serve, and it was pretty simple. You go and like get your food, and then you swipe your card, and you're done.
Right.
But it took me an hour to figure that process out. And I didn't want to ask anybody because I was terrified, and I didn't really, see any signage because I was either missing it blindly, being in a panic or whatever.
Right.
So I just sat back and observed, and I ended up getting a migraine from not eating.
Wow.
And I just was like, okay, well, I guess I have to just jump in and try this now. And then I do it, and I'm fine.
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
thing. But
Yeah.
it's the moments before that.
Yeah, so that's problem avoidant, right? And so this goes back to something you'll hear on our show a lot, because people write in and go, hey, is this a diagnosable problem? And we'll be like, hey, first off, this isn't technically therapy, don't sue us. But also, we're always looking for what's called a clinically significant amount of distress. So a lot of people label themselves with disorders when they probably should not. The thing that we're looking for is, does this interfere with your life in a meaningful way? Not, do you take the other side of the street whenever you see somebody coming because you feel nervous? You were able to get to your destination just fine. But whenever you don't eat because, or you miss your flight because of the problem or whatever, okay, that's clinically significant. So, and I'm not diagnosing you, but I'm saying, okay, this is meaningful, right? So let's take a look at it. So he used the right word. This is essentially one of the traits of anxiety. It's a different form of it. But that self-talk and using cognitive behavioral therapy is usually how we would approach trying to take away the energy of this so that we don't fortune tell. Or if we do it in a proper way. Because when I fortune tell, it's always the worst possible thing's going to happen. It's never, I'm going to win the lottery. Like if I'm like, if I go, I'm going to hit by a car. It's like, no, I'm going to go win megabucks. Like, but that never happens, right? But neither does the really negative thing, And like because we get so in our own heads, we end up causing much more anxiety than was due for the moment. And so one thing that you'll learn if you do attend therapy is future simulation, how to simulate a reality in a fair and just way using evidence. And again, feelings, not facts. So I feel frightened. Should there be something to fear? Well, no, this is a McDonald's. I'm probably going to be okay. Like 1 billion people served, okay?
Yeah.
1 billion and one. I'm probably just going to have the same experience as the rest of them. It's okay. It's not great. It's not bad. It's a cheeseburger. So, good question, though, man. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time. 25 minutes to do the entire outro.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we are going to have to, I think, end it on that one, just because we are getting to the end. But we're still here all day. I will become decreasingly sober as the night goes on. But, this wasn't therapy to begin with, so you can't sue me.
Yeah, we will be around.
At the end of our shows, we usually do a couple of different sections. We usually do an apologies tour because Jim is very active on Twitter. So I have a few apologies to make as we wrap up the show, and then we'll make our final comments. But these are things that I owe the world. Dear the Mormon Church, I'm sorry that I posted a GIF of Jim Halpert not giving a damn and saying this is how bartenders and coffee baristas felt about you decreasing your Sunday school hours. Dear Barnes & Noble bookstores, I'm sorry that when I heard your company was up for sale, I checked on Amazon to see if I can get it cheaper there first. This really happened. Dear Senator Ted Cruz, I'm sorry that I said you are the Nickelback of the United States Congress. I've
That
made
should
amends.
be an apology to Nickelback.
Mea culpa, Nickelback. Dear nutritional scientists, I'm sorry that I called you ignorant bigots when your research concluded that not all calories are created equal. Read the Constitution. And lastly, last apology for this night. Dear scientist who contracted hepatitis E from a lab mouse, I'm sorry I implied that your accident was the result of a workplace romance. I have apologized, and more will eventually come.
Notice I'm not laughing because all of those are real.
Check my
You
Twitter.
didn't make those up. That
That's Sin
actually
City Shrink.
happened.
Feel free.
All right. And we want to thank our TheraProducers. We got Smitty Scoop.
Give it a hand for Smitty.
We got Jake Schneider back there.
Woo! We
As
want to
well-
thank all of our Therapods in the audience. We love you guys. We want to thank our THERAPALs as well. And we want to thank Paul Mattingly for coming up with THERAPALs, because that was his idea. All right, we did it.
Yeah, we're
So
ready
Jacob,
for-
cue the music and we'll do our outro. That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. Thank you to our new landlords, Ice Cream Social Podcast, and thank you to all those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on patreon.com/therapy.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Ice Cream.
I'm Therascoopologist.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will see you for your next appointment next year at ScoopFest 2019.
2019! Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
Nick and Jim, everybody. Pod therapy. Fantastic. Thank you guys so much. All right, I'll stand in there too.